A new European study alleged that Chinese scientists developed COVID-19 in a lab and then sought to obfuscate by reverse engineering. The corporate media have changed course to support lab leak theory and self-claimed having egg on the face, but they blamed Trump. A mayoral candidate of Atlanta also had egg on his face. For what? The Chinese Communist Party just announced to allow 3 babies per family. Why is that? Hello, welcome to the Wei and Kathy show. Obviously, today is just me for this time, and because Wei is really busy with his series show to explain the principles of American founding principles. So he has promised to our audience, in the Chinese audience, he's going to do that, but it's overdue. So he's busy on that. So I will be bringing you the topics today. All right, without further ado, a new study alleged that Chinese scientists developed COVID-19 in a lab and sought to obfuscate by reverse engineering virus version to cause it to appear to be the illness evolved from bats. This is from 2 authors. One of them is the British professor Angus Dalglish, and another is a Norwegian scientist, Dr. Birger Sorensen. They wrote a paper that they have had prima facie evidence of ritual engineering in China for a year already, but it was ignored by academics and major journals, as they claim. Dr. Dalglish is a professor of oncology at St. George's University, London, and is best known for his breakthrough creating the first working HIV vaccine to treat diagnosed patients and allow them to go off medication for months. And Sorensen, he's a virologist and is the chair of a pharmaceutical company called Immuna, which developed a coronavirus vaccine candidate called BioVac-19. And also Dalglish has some shares in this company. So these 2 scientists told the Daily Mail that for a year they have possessed primary fact evidence of ritual engineering in China in early 2020. And they said that they think that there have been a ritual engineering virus created. They have changed the virus, they meaning the Chinese scientists, then tried to make out it as a sequence years ago. So how did they discover it? And what are their evidences? The 2 scientists said that they discovered it when they were analyzing COVID-19 samples last year in an attempt to create a vaccine. So they discovered some unique fingerprint in the virus, which they say could only have arisen from manipulation in a lab. Now, the 2 scientists have authored a new study, which they did months of forensic analysis. So how they do it? They looked back at the experiments done at the Wuhan lab between 2002 and 2019, and then pieced together how the Chinese scientists there, and some of them, they claim that working in concert with American universities and institutions. And they said much of the work was centered around the controversial gain-of-function research. We know the gain-of-function research involves tweaking naturally occurred viruses to make them more infectious so that they can replicate in human cells in a lab in order to study the virus's potential effect on humans. Dalglish and Sorensen, They claim that the scientists working on the gain-of-function projects took a natural coronavirus backbone found in Chinese cave bats and sliced into a new spike, turning it into the deadly and highly transmissible SARS-CoV-2, which is, became a worldwide pandemic now. And one of the evidence, they said, is the presence of 4 amino acids in a row on the SARS-CoV-2 spike. Alleges said that the laws of physics means that you cannot have 4 positively charged amino acids in a row. That only way you can get this is if you artificially manufacture it. And Sorensen also described such a row of 4 is extremely unlikely. So their paper says that these features of SARS-CoV-2 are the unique fingerprints, which are indicative of a purposeful manipulation, and that the likelihood of it being the result of a natural process is very small. So in this paper, there are other accusations of the CCP. One of them is they are claiming that the CCP actually deliberately destructed, concealed, or contaminated data in the lab. And it noted that the Chinese scientists who wish to share their knowledge have not been able to do so or have disappeared. They also wrote that preserving virus materials and the related information have been destroyed, so they are facing large gaps in data which may never be able to be filled. The scientists also mentioned the media censorship. They said that they tried to publish their findings, but it's about a year ago, but they were rejected by major scientific journalists, which were at the time, they just so sure that the virus jumped naturally from the bats or from other animals to human being. Now, over a year later, the leading academics, politicians, and the media finally flipped and have begun to contemplate the possibility that the COVID-19 escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. And we all know that last Tuesday, President Joe Biden ordered the intelligence community to re-examine how the virus originated, including the lab accident theory. And prior to that, we know the Wall Street Journal reported a still classified intelligence report. And even before then, the ABC in Washington, D.C. also reported that actually the Lawrence National Lab here in Berkeley, California, they had a intelligence branch called the Z Lab did a secret investigation on the lab in Wuhan and had a report. So this new paper by Dr. Alleges and Sorensen had 22 pages and is reported by Daily Mail that they are set to publish this paper in the scientific journal called Quarterly Review of Biophysics and Discovery. And we shall see that. And in the meanwhile, we all know that the media, the so-called mainstream media or the corporate media, have scrambled to reverse their earlier position on the lab leak theory. Actually, just, besides what I just mentioned, the Wall Street Journal report, the ABC Washington, D.C. report, there are not really so much new evidence having emerged in the year since the theory was first floated. So it's kind of puzzling why the media just shifted their position so significantly. However, anyhow, the reporters admitted dismissing the Wuhan lab leak theory was in part because it's raised. It was proposed by the then President Trump and the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. For example, the ABC News chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl was asked on ABC's This Week just during the weekend why it matters that the lab leak theory was initially met with dismissal or skepticism. And he answered, "Yes, I think a lot of people have egg on their face." But what he said is this was because that the first put forward by Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump. And note that Carl said, look, something may be true even if Donald Trump said them. He said because Trump said sometimes said something out of control, and he said these reporters would consider racist, meaning Trump called the virus as a China virus. But he said now serious people are saying it needs a serious inquiry. And that seems to explain why the journalists like him think, need to take it seriously. But think of it, does that make sense? Carl is not the only reporter saying that. Many reporters have admitted to making a mistake by dismissing the lab leak theory as a conspiracy. But, some of them doing the same thing, they blame Trump. They asserted that Trump and his administration was untruthful on other matters, so they dismissed his lab leak claim. For example, another example is New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman. She said on CNN, "I think it's important to remember that part of the issue was because it was raised by President Trump and Mike Pompeo. But they refused to release the evidence showing what it is, and so because of that, made this instantly political." Can you make sense of it? Why? Because Trump and Pompeo said it, then it instantly become political. And she said, given everything we know about how Trump handled such thing, caution. That's from another reporter. It's from a Washington Post reporter, Aaron Blake. He wrote in an analysis saying that given everything we know about how Trump handled such thing, caution and the skepticism were invited. And when the Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton last year said the coronavirus was connected to the research being done in Wuhan, China, the Washington Post said Cotton was pursuing a fringe theory. And the Washington Post fact checker Glenn Kessler said in May of 2020 it was virtually impossible for the virus to originate from a lab. And now he also come to the defense of the media initially skepticism of Trump's claims. And he said, the Trump administration's messaging was often accompanied by anti-Chinese rhetoric that made it easier for skeptics to ignore its claim. So it just makes people wonder what kind of a fact checker he is, what kind of a facts he is checking on. He's checking on the real facts or just checking on how a person is, right? So can people really trust him in this type of fact checking? By the way, he said Trump's rhetoric was anti-Chinese. As a person who immigrated from China, people like to call Chinese American, although, I'm a really American. Trump had explained the time after time, he called it China virus, is because the Chinese Communist government, it came from China, and the Chinese Communist government did something to conceal the pandemic, right? So it's not anti-Chinese. We all know Trump administration is the first administration in recent era that a American government can differentiate CCP, the Chinese Communist Government, versus Chinese. So this fact checker reporter just, don't realize that, or I don't know why. And so New York Times writer, it seems to be they still have some writers have common sense. David Leonard, he said it was a mistake for liberals and the reporters to dismiss claim just because they came from Trump and Republicans like Senator Tom Cotton. All right. So yeah, as this lab leak theory gained traction, we all know that the Biden administration ordered investigation, 90-day investigation, although, some of the experts just feel that, as I mentioned, actually, let's see how the others react. So some top U.S. virus expert said that the CCP, the origin of the virus needs to be found out in order to prevent another pandemic. So that's from some top U.S. virus experts. One of them is Peter Hotez, an American coronavirus vaccine expert and professor of pediatrics and molecular virology and microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine. And he said in an interview with NBC that it's absolutely necessary to prevent future outbreaks of pandemics by just finding out the origin of the virus. So he said, unless we can fully understand the origin of COVID-19, there will be COVID-26 and COVID-32. He pointed out that the SARS broke out in southern China in 2002 and 2003, and then the Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, appeared in the world in 2012, and then now here we have this coronavirus, the COVID-19, it's affecting the whole world. So he said it's necessary for the scientific community to thoroughly understand what happened to be able to avoid it, avoid the pandemic happen again. Hotez also said that he does not think that the intelligence community will continue to investigation will be much of help, because he believed the U.S. has pushed the intelligence work to the limit. So he said that what instead should be done is it needs a team of scientists composed of epidemiologists, virologists, and bat ecologists together to conduct a 6-month to 1-year investigation in Hubei province, where Wuhan is located at, to completely unravel the origin of the COVID-19. Hotez believes that Beijing should allow scientists to collect blood samples from local residents, wild bats, and animals in the laboratory, and also allow the experts to interview local scientists, check laboratory notebooks, etc. And he suggests that to achieve that, he believes the U.S. should impose greater pressure on Beijing, including considering sanctions. And the other expert is the former head of the Trump administration's Food and Drug Administrations, which is also an expert in Stanford University nearby, here, Scott Gottlieb. He said on a CBS program on May 30th that there is more and more information supporting the virus that may have leaked from the Wuhan laboratory. He believed that the CCP has repeatedly denied that, but it has not been able to produce strong evidence to explain the origin of the virus. And he said it has also refused to cooperate with experts in investigations. Gottlieb said that the Chinese government has the opportunity to provide evidence to refute the claim of lab leak theory, including providing the blood samples of laboratory personnel, providing original virus strains, and providing early samples, but it has always refused to do so. All right, so yeah, how this will go. Right now, both the Senate and the House are really strong on demanding the investigation of the origin of the virus as well. So that's show, we will follow up on that. All right, coming up, we'll talk about an Atlanta council member who also had an egg on face and what happened. Antonio Brown is an Atlanta City Council member and also a mayoral candidate. He is running on a campaign of reimagine public safety, but he just became a victim of the city's crime wave last week, and it's on a broad daylight. Noticeably, this council member also previously voted to defund the local police. So what happened was on last Wednesday, May 26th, the city council member Anthony Brown, he just attended a ribbon cutting ceremony of a local small business. Then he stopped at a plaza, just parked his car. It was a white Mercedes coupe, and to speak to a fellow community leader. Then he noticed 4 children, little children, from as little as like 6 or 7-year-old to no more than 12-year-old. He saw them nearby the store, but within a few seconds, the kids were in his car. So he and the person who he was talking to, they ran to the car. It's very, only maybe a few feet away. And they tried to get the kids out of the car. But the kid on the driver's side already starting to figure things out and start the car. So Brown said that they had plans. They knew what they are going to do. And the kid hit the gas and pulled out and starting to take off. Brown said one of the kids who was sitting next to the driver acted as though he had a gun because he had something pointing out under his shirt. So Brown said he didn't realize that because his Mercedes Cooper actually had a keyless push to start ignition. So since he's there, the kid pushed the key and it started. So he said he tried to stop them, but only got dragged for about half a block. Eventually, he just let go because he said he realized if he just keep on dragging, then he may kill himself. Brown said that later on, then he just filed a report with the Atlanta Police Department. And on the Twitter, he thanked them. And police confirmed that they later found his car, but did not say if they made any arrests. And Brown said that he doesn't want to press charges against any of the kids, according to a local TV reporting. So obviously, this happened actually just weeks after Brown announced his mayoral candidate campaigning, and it's really amid an increase in violence crime across the city. For example, the homicide in the city are up at least 52% from this time this year, while the number of shooting has increased more than 40%. And according to the Atlanta Police Department's most recent crime data. So Brown, when he launched his campaign, he said, his platform was to reimagine the public safety. But according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Brown was one of the 7 council members last year who voted in support of an ordinance to withhold $73 million from the $218 million budget of Atlanta's police department budget, until the mayor drafted a plan to reinvent the city's culture of policing. So here we go, you know, someone would just think that Brown had egg on his face, but obviously he doesn't think so, because when he talked to the media about his reaction on this incident, he said it's what he said. Let's see. Okay, yeah, he said that this is a generational poverty issue, because no matter how many police you put on the street, won't be able to stop it. So one may just wonder, what does that have to do with the generational poverty, right? Even the 6-year-old or 12-year-old, such little kids, knows to steal a car and there won't be any consequence. What does that to do with generational poverty issue, right? So that's, you know, and actually the critics of the movement of defund the police and the gun control believe that such movement would only hamper people's ability to defend themselves. Founder of a crime research center, Dr. John Lott, told Washington Examiner, he said you have had the biggest spikes in the areas where police are not being allowed to do their job, either because the orders or because changes in budget. And the president of the Upper Midwest Law Center, Doug Seaton, said that Minnesota's cuts to the city's police budget have caused the spike in crime. And John Lott said he's not surprised to hear that. He also said Los Angeles, New York, and Seattle are also examples of this. And they also said some local government even proposed to a Department of Public Safety would replace the police department. And in the meanwhile, some suggest to impose more legal restrictions on firearms. Seaton said, when you are dealing with violent shooters in the neighborhood, psychologists, social workers, or the neighborhood volunteers, they are not going to be the ticket. And John Lott said law enforcement isn't allowed to its job to protect people, and then we have politicians try to pass or have passed laws to prevent individuals from being able to go and protect themselves. So, on the other hand, no matter how these local governments or some of the politicians try to, just to restrict people's rights, American people are still able to make their own decisions and choices to protect themselves. The new data shows that there has been increase in the amount of gun buyers and the amount of gun owners in the U.S. New data shows that 20% of Americans who bought guns last year were first-time buyers, 20% of them. And in 2019, it's the same, 20% are the first-time gun buyers. So this data is according to the new preliminary data from the Northeastern University and the Harvard Injury Control Research Center. So the data showed that 39% of households in the U.S. in 2020 owned guns. That's an increase from 2016's 32%. And data also show that approximately 6.5% of American adults, around 17 million people, bought guns last year. And that's an increase from 5.3% in 2019. On the other hand, FBI's background check system recorded more checks in last month, in April of 2021, than any other April. So that really shows people are still making their own decisions. And thanks to our Constitution, the Second Amendment still protects our rights. All right, so now let's go to China. So what the Chinese Communist government is doing right now. The Chinese government said on May 31st, it will ease its limits on births again, allowing couples to have three children instead of two, to address the country's, again, population and to address the issue of country's population problem and keep its economy thriving. So that's according to a report by the Chinese Communist Party's official news agency, Xinhua News Agency. On Monday, May 31st, the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China Central Committee held a meeting. And the head of the party, Xi Jinping, announced that the optimization of the fertility policy, and they wanted to implement the one couple can have three children policy and some supporting measure to deal with the aging population issue to maintain China's human resources advantages. So the China's ruling party, the Communist Party, has been actually flip-flopping on this childbirth issue. So let's take a look at the history of its flip-flopping. All right, so in 1949, when the Communist Party just got the power, Mao Zedong believed in more populations. But pretty soon, so actually in between April 1950 to early 1953, the central government announced to have to control contraception and abortion. And after the 1953 and before 1970, early 1970s, they have been like just kind of flip-flopping very in small scales, right? You sometimes allowing four kids, sometimes saying two kids. Then in the early 1970s, actually they starting to try to implement one-child issue. At that time, they're just saying, there's a slogan saying, one is not too many, two are just right, and three are too many, okay? Then in the late 1970s, from 1979 to 1990, they implemented a very strict one-child policy. And a lot of people actually, because especially for the farmers, they just want a boy, so they aborted a lot of girls. And between 1991 to 2010, the government found that they had a very low fertility rate. Okay, and for example, in 2010, the census showed that the total population of mainland China reached 1.34 million, but the total fertility rate was only 1.18, which is the lowest level in the world. So after 2010, they start to relax the policy. In November of 2013, the central government decided to implement a two-child policy, which allow if the couple, at least one of them is one child, so the couple can have two children. And then in October 2015, they expanded this two-child policy to all the couples. And now, right, they are implementing the three-child policy. So why is that? Why is that they implement it now, right? So the Chinese population expert, American scholar Yi Fuxian, tweeted that the two-child policy in 2013 and the comprehensive two-child policy in 2015 that I mentioned were all decided at the Communist Party Congress. But this three-child policy, it just cannot wait to be released this time, which may relate to the latest census data. According to the official data released in early May in 2020, China's total population still exceeds 1.4 billion. But the average annual growth rate will actually declined. So it shows that aging has become a basic national condition. The results was actually the announcing of the census data also had a difficult birth during the process. And there are some people actually, including some media, broke the news that it is because the China's population had actually fallen below 1.4 billion, and the central government had to process the data before it can be announced. And this population expert believes that the real population data is too frightening to the government. So even though it's not related to the public, it's not released to the public, the CCP's decision makers are still frightened. Therefore, they must first announce this expedient policy of the 3 children at the Politburo meeting. And he said people can expect that the party Congress at the end of this year will have bigger moves and give directional announcements in this regard. So, but will this policy work, right? So actually, judging from the strong reaction from the Chinese people, the possibility of it to be successful seems to be very small. Why is that? So on the same day, Xinhua News Agency conducted a poll on its Weibo account. Weibo is the Chinese social media controlled by the government, and asking, are you ready for the 3-child policy? So what's the result? About 29,000 out of 31,000 participants of the poll said that they are not considering that at all, which means that's 93.4%, just saying they are not considering 3 children. So as a result, Xinhua News Agency just took off the poll immediately. Actually, they supposed to have this poll for 6 days, but they probably did not anticipate such result. So as you can see, under a Chinese communist regime, how many people a couple can have has to be ordered by the government. And when the government wants you to give more birth, you have to give more birth. If they don't want you to give birth, you don't want to. So that's why we wanted to let you know about what's going on in China and the communist regime, and because we know what it's like to lose a country to communism. You really lose everything, and including your soul, because this communist party does not believe in God, right? So actually, today is the Memorial Day weekend. I really appreciate that you spent the last part of the Memorial Day weekend with me with the Win Kathy show. So at the end, we'd like to really give you such a reminder, which actually is from President Ronald Reagan. Freedom is not free, and America is the last stand on earth. We have to fight for it. And so since Wei's not here, today I'm still gonna, give you a Chinese character lesson, which I think is proper for this occasion. And remember, we learned 自由, freedom and liberty, and America, right? Beautiful country. So America is a beautiful country with freedom and liberty. So today I'm gonna teach you another character, which is love. Love, and in Chinese it's called I. So we really love this beautiful country which has freedom and liberty, right? So can you say it? I, which means love. I. Because if we don't protect and defend our freedom, our beautiful country, its sovereignty, then, and we have to really to protect against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Otherwise, we could lose them all. So, yeah, 爱美国自由. So love the beautiful country with liberty and freedom. Hope this will bring a special meaning to you. And at this moment, we also would like to take this opportunity to thank to all those who have served this great nation, who sacrificed for this great nation. And may God bless America. So keep fighting for our freedom and love this great and beautiful country. All right, so this is for today, and so hope to see you again next show. Take care. Have a good night. Bye-bye.